This is Trump Park Avenue. It's an historic 32-story luxury condo in Manhattan. It's one of the highlights, you could say, in Donald Trump's real estate portfolio. And because of the New York Attorney General's lawsuit against Mr. Trump, we know that in 2020, the Trump Organization received an appraisal for Trump Park Avenue, which set its value at $84.5 million. It's an interesting sum. Today, a jury ordered Donald Trump to pay writer E. Jean Carroll $83.3 million, approximately one Trump Park Avenue, for defaming her. Breaking that number down a little bit more, the jury awarded E. Jean Carroll $18.3 million to compensate her for the harm Trump's lies caused her. They awarded her another $65 million in punitive damages to, well, punish Donald Trump, to deter him from defaming E. Jean Carroll ever again. We'll have more on that in just a moment. The 9-member jury took just 2 hours and 45 minutes to reach its verdict after hearing final arguments from Trump and Carroll's lawyers. Mr. Trump himself spent the final day of the trial causing disruption. When Ms. Carroll's lawyers were giving their closing arguments, Trump stood up and he walked out of the room, at which point the judge interrupted Ms. Carroll's lawyers and ordered that the official record reflect Donald Trump's abrupt exit. At one point, the judge had to caution Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, that she was on the verge of spending some time in lockup for her own interruptions. Then, around the time Trump's attorney was making her closing arguments, more than a dozen posts were made on Trump's Truth Social account attacking both E. Jean Carroll and the judge, posts that repeated some of the same defamatory claims for which Donald Trump was now being forced to pay millions and millions of dollars. By the way, this was after Trump had already posted a video at 12:16 a.m. in which he personally attacks Ms. Carroll again.
I don't even know who this woman is. I have no idea who she is, where she came from. This is another scam. It's a political witch hunt. And somehow we're going to have to fight this.
All of this would seem to be grounds for E. Jean Carroll to potentially sue Donald Trump for defamation again. And remember that this is the second defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll to come to trial. A different jury already awarded her $5.5 million in her other case against Donald Trump. Donald Trump is literally awash in defamation cases here. He is on the hook for extraordinary amounts of money, and yet he cannot seem to help himself. Now, Trump has vowed to appeal this verdict, and as he has already appealed the verdict for his other defamation case. But in the meantime, Donald Trump still has to find a way to pay. As the New York Times very helpfully explains, Mr. Trump has tapped his Political Action Committee's coffers to pay for his own legal fees and other expenses stemming from his criminal indictments and civil trials. Yet, $83.3 million eclipses the amount in his political accounts. The verdict on Friday will require Donald Trump to reach into his own pocket. So in order to meet his financial obligations here, Donald Trump will either have to give the court $83 million to hold on to while the appeals process plays out, or he'll have to put up some kind of collateral for a loan. Now, the internet is already having fun with that second option. There are already several depictions of E. Jean Carroll Tower and E. Jean Carroll Tower, Chicago. You already know that the appraised value of Trump Park Avenue would just barely cover the cost of Trump's obligations here, and that's very likely not even enough to cover all of his financial exposure. After all, we are still awaiting a decision by New York Judge Arthur Engoron, the man who is overseeing Trump's massive civil fraud case. In that case, New York Attorney General Letitia James is seeking a judgment of $370 million. And Judge Engoron's ruling is expected in the next couple of weeks. Could be a very expensive start to Donald Trump's new year. Whatever the exact price tag, though, these civil trials are proof that Donald Trump cannot escape accountability forever, that eventually the bill comes due. In response to today's verdict, E. Jean Carroll released a statement. This is a great victory for every woman who stands up when she's been knocked down, and a huge defeat for every bully who has tried to keep a woman down. Joining me now are Neal Katyal, former acting Solicitor General of the United States, and Katie Phang, host of The Katie Phang Show here on MSNBC. Thank you both for being here tonight. Neal, I just want to first get your reaction to these numbers that we saw out of this defamation case in New York today.
Well, I know the internet's having fun with it, but this is a really serious thing. A former president has now been found liable for sexually abusing Jean Carroll and is now not just liable, but has to pay tens of millions of dollars in damages because the jury found that they needed that much to deter him, that he'd do something like this again. So to use the technical legal term, it's a bigly loss for Donald Trump. And this is a decision that, you know, Alex, doesn't come from the deep state. It doesn't come from a special prosecutor or the Biden administration. It's a jury of Donald Trump's peers. And they heard him. He had the opportunity to present the best case he could. He tried. They found it thoroughly unconvincing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make up for what Jean Carroll endured, but there's certainly some sense of justice in it.
Katie, this is money for defaming Miss Carroll. There was a separate trial for the sexual assault. The price tag here is extraordinary, it seems to me, a layman. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your expectations for how Donald Trump actually coughs up this money, whether this is held in escrow, whether he seeks a loan, given what happened in previous civil trials.
Yeah, so, you know, Alex, I like to say, don't sleep on the civil cases. People get very excited about the criminal cases, right? Because clearly the idea of Donald Trump in jail is pretty titillating. However, don't sleep on the civil cases because those are the ones that hit him where it hurts him the most. Donald Trump defiantly thinks that he's not going to have to, serve a day in jail. And as of right now, he hasn't. But when it comes to paying up, he has had to pony up at least $5.5 to $5.6 million because he had to post that in order to appeal the first defamation trial victory that E. Jean Carroll secured against him. Now, whether he's able to pony up that same amount in terms of the verdict that just came in is left to be seen. But under the appropriate statutory strictures that exist, he's going to have to pay that entire amount in a bond plus interest to cover the duration of the appeals process. We do know that that first defamation trial that E. Jean Carroll brought and successfully won in 2023, that one's still winding its way through the appellate courts. And so that interest keeps on ticking along. But January 31st is right around the corner, and that is the date that Justice Engoron in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud trial is due to render his verdict on the remaining counts that are being brought by Letitia James. And as we know, she's seeking $370 million in disgorgement. So if Donald Trump thought that this $83.3 million today was a lot of money, he may be in for a rude awakening next week. But I also want to talk about very quickly, Alex, the following concept, which is this. When you saw what happened today with Donald Trump happen, it's because there was a foundation laid from that first trial, meaning he went in today and he could not, throughout the course of this trial, deny liability. And that was because of that original verdict. Same thing went on in the New York Attorney General's case. A finding of partial summary judgment was done by Justice Engoron. And so the determination that fraud had already been perpetrated against Trump, his sons and his business entities, he went into this latest trial against Letitia James with the same thing. And so because of that, and when you've seen that you've now had two juries come back against him, to Neal Katyal's point as well, right? There have been grand juries that have returned indictments. These have been people. These have been ordinary citizens that have been called to duty, that have been asked to serve in these capacities. They're the ones that have returned indictments, and now they're the ones that have returned these verdicts. And so these are the people, the ordinary citizens that are doing extraordinary work, that are telling Donald Trump, you're now being held accountable.
That's such a good point. And I want to get to Judge Engoron's looming decision in a minute. But, Neal, to Katie's point about the jury, I thought this was really remarkable. Judge Kaplan, the judge in this case, told the jury, my advice to you is that you never disclose that you were on this jury. First of all, Neal, how unusual is it for a judge to say something like that to a jury? And, I mean, if you're a member of the jury, talk to me about how extraordinary that position is in the age of Trump.
In a quarter century of practicing, Alex, I've never heard a statement like that from any judge. It just doesn't exist, and it just demonstrates just how far out of the norm Donald Trump is and what he does to people who call him out and hold him liable. And so Jean Carroll has to fear, the jury has to fear. And this judge is not like some wild-eyed lefty judge. This is one of the most respected judges in the country, Judge Kaplan. I don't think he's considered political in any way, shape, or form. And for him to say that, I think is pretty extraordinary. And then just to pick up on a point Katie made, if I were one of Trump's criminal attorneys right now, I'd be terrified at what happened today, because it's not the amount of damages, the $83 million, that's concerning, as much as it shows how much ordinary people, juries, don't trust Donald Trump. They don't believe him. And you also saw the way Donald Trump acted in court. I mean, you can't storm out of court or mutter under your breath or act like an entitled toddler in a criminal trial. It's not going to work before the jury. And so I think if you're one of the Trump's lawyers right now facing the criminal stuff, you're going to double down on your attempt to try and delay this thing until after the election with the hope he can win and undo those prosecutions. This civil case, by the way, can't be undone. Even if he wins the presidency, this judgment will stand. He'll have to obviously try and reverse it on appeal, but he can't order the Justice Department to drop it.